Our next panel, the subject of which is preparing for the democratization of data and identity. The panel members will be Chad Brown, Chief Marketing Officer of JC Hospitality Virgin Hotels, David Wells, Head of Retail Data Marketplace at Snowflake, Travis Klinger, Senior Vice President, Activations and Addressability at LiveRamp. And this panel will be moderated by Zeta Global Zone Chief Data Officer, Neej Gore.
Thank you very much. And the flipping El Musas is a tough act to follow, so hopefully we live up to the challenge. My name is Neej Gore. I am Zeta's Chief Data Officer. If you've watched Game of Thrones in Westeros, they have this famous expression. They say, winter is coming, right? All through the seasons. I've started to adopt an expression in marketing, and that expression is data democratization is coming. A little harder to say, but also incredibly impactful. So I am thrilled today to welcome two of our great partners and one of our great clients on stage. Why don't we take a minute just to introduce yourselves and your company and what you do there?
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is David Wells. I'm actually the head of media and advertising on the Snowflake marketplace, which means my remit is to surface best-in-class providers and services in our marketplace, and then work with our media and advertising industry team on our media data cloud and its go-to-market.
Hey, great to be here as well. I'm Travis Klinger. I'm the Senior Vice President of Activations and Addressability at LiveRamp. My remit is really to oversee everything we do with media, MarTech, and AdTech. And then LiveRamp, we are the data connectivity platform for the world.
Well, thank you for having me. My name is Chad Brown. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for JC Hospitality. We are a management, investment, and development company. Most recently acquired Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas and converted it to Virgin Hotels Las Vegas. And so that's been our core focus, but we are a management, development, and investment company focusing on the marketing for...
I hear you're a good guy to know with your connections in Vegas.
It could be.
All right.
Could be.
Yeah, that's great. So let's do some level setting before we continue. Hopefully the slides here will come up for me. So for too long, marketers have been asking these kinds of questions within organizations. I've been in marketing for over 20 years, and these questions existed 20 years ago, and they still exist. So the promise of data democratization is that these types of questions will go away. You're going to empower more areas of the business within marketing and outside of marketing to do more with the data, right? So this is the level set that I want everyone to think about as we start to get into questions for the panelists. The definition of data democratization is pretty straightforward, if the clicker will work. There we go. Actually, let's talk about this first. So some of the tailwinds and headwinds that are actually pushing this forward. You've all heard about CDPs. We've spent a lot of time today talking about CDPs and Zeta CDP. You've probably all heard about the relevance of clean rooms in this next era of the marketing ecosystem. Privacy first, privacy compliant. They're allowing enterprises a way to exchange data. And of course, the culture of enterprises is fundamentally shifting, right? So right now, we've gone from a culture where we talked about data to where you're being asked to make data-informed decisions every single day. So to define the actual data democratization, this is how we think about it at Zeta. It's the enabling of individuals and teams, regardless of their technical abilities, to make easier, faster, and smarter data-powered decisions. And this is really an underpinning and a pillar of what is more broadly referred to as digital transformation. So my first question is actually to Snowflake, to you, David. You're in the business of data clouds where data sharing is core to enterprises now. Can you define data sharing for this audience and help us understand how it's used, maybe an example of a customer that's doing it really well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea of data sharing is totally disruptive. Snowflake's rise to prominence was as a data warehouse that operated across all the public clouds and all the public regions within those clouds. And the idea is that within your own org or with a partner, you can share data or a view of data without movement of that data. So all of a sudden, if you're a large marketer, you want to share data within your own org or with a partner so that that partner can glean insights or add value, you can actually share a view of that data without movement of data. And the analogy that we use is sort of like a Google Doc. We've all worked with Google Docs, and the idea that you might have data living in a spreadsheet. You don't actually share the spreadsheet, you share a view of it, and that person can actually extrapolate some of the value there. And so that really led to just massive adoption of Snowflake, is that you had these large marketers who wanted a secure place to park their data and make it available within their own teams or with their partners. And so now it's actually really applicable to media and advertising. You have marketers who have platforms and publishers where they want to seamlessly share data, whether it's the platform sharing to them or vice versa, to sort of glean insights about their consumers or who their core constituency is. So like if you think about Zeta and the CDP, you have marketers that use that CDP where they might pull out some of that first-party data in that CDP. They might enrich it with third-party data assets. They might create models and then share it back with the Zeta CDP to personalize experience and add other types of value.
Is there a customer or maybe a vertical that you've seen especially adopt this technology faster than others?
That's a really great question. I think we've seen really good traction in CPG and retail. So anywhere there's a lot of transaction data, there's a lot of need for data to personalize experience so that things are more relevant. We've seen a tremendous amount of traction there. I think the other thing that we're seeing in media and advertising is now that so much marketer data is actually living in Snowflake, we're seeing more and more platforms like Zeta and others actually come to the data that lives within Snowflake and develop technologies and solutions actually within Snowflake. So LiveRamp is a great example. They have world-class identity resolution. We have Travis Klinger to thank for that. And one of the things that LiveRamp has done is actually created what we call native identity, where they're able to resolve identity with data and logic that lives in Snowflake and is never pinging an off-platform API. And it's, we're incredibly grateful to partners like LiveRamp that have invested in Snowflake, and then the marketers that use LiveRamp are incredibly grateful to LiveRamp and to Snowflake to provide that service.
Makes sense. Travis, a follow-up to that. So on the identity side, how do you think of the democratization of identity as it relates to the larger goals of the marketer, and where does addressability fit into this puzzle?
Yeah, so I think on one hand, we're like data democratization and where we're seeing identity, marketers have a lot more first-party and second-party data now, right? It's much easier to get that, whether you're engaging directly with your consumers, or as David mentioned, we see retailers and CPGs working together like never before. Like it used to be, if you were a CPG, you had an idea of what was sold, but you couldn't get the SKU-level transaction data. We now see CPGs every day linking exact media exposures with exact transactions and saying, hey, I drove an increase to a more premium product, or they bought more of the product. And I think it's really exciting, but at the same time, then we also see this other trend, and you had it up here on your first side, but we've also got massive signal loss. So kind of taking it to your second question of addressability. So on one hand, you have a lot more data out there, and it's a lot easier to use the data, but now we're seeing a restriction of signals on all of the devices and the browsers.
Yep.
So we've seen this, Safari, Firefox, cookieless. We see this with ATT with the IDFA. We know the Android ID is going away. We know there's a fun acronym that everyone can learn about called NatCatcher to take out the IP address. Leave it to Google to come up with that big of an
homework
acronym.
assignment after the class today.
And so I think as we look at that, it's like, how do you then enable addressability to pair with all of this data? And so we believe the key to that is actually in those first-party consumer relationships. And it's pretty exciting because you start to see it linked together, right? So you have these retailers who are establishing their relationships. They're saying, share the data with us. You have retail media networks spinning up as part of that. And then they're actually working with the publishers to also enable addressability. So how do publishers get data? How do they have a conversation with their consumer? And then we're able to link it together. And that can be done in a clean room like Snowflake, where you have a publisher, for example, you could have someone like an NBC bring in all of their consumers, where they have all their Peacock subscribers, overlap that with a retailer, and then activate that out on that Peacock inventory. Or it can happen on the open web with folks like the Trade Desk and with MediaMap, and even soon probably folks like Google. And then of course you always have the walled garden. So as a marketer, things are getting much easier to do from a data perspective, but actually being able to activate and measure that data is also getting much more complicated.
Yeah, so fidelity loss is a thing now for marketers, and they have to think about partners. So how do you think a marketer should think about growing their first-party asset with balancing third-party resources like what LiveRamp provides to extend that asset, the identity asset?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our third-party data marketplace, and I think people talk about third-party data in the application of advertising today, but it's important to remember third-party data has always been used for advertising. If we go back to LiveRamp's former parent company, Axiom, it started as a direct mail company. It was selling third-party data way before most people in this room were born, back in like the 50s and 60s. And as we look at third-party data today, it's a great supplement for first-party data. You can bring it in at the core of the CRM. We're seeing more and more marketers blend it together. So when you sign up and you have a name and postal, how do you append some data, something like income, demographic data, pull that in so that you can more seamlessly personalize that experience. And then we're also seeing it be blended with publisher data, right? So one of the things with this loss of signal is ultimately there's going to be less media available in the future that's addressable than today. And so that media is going to naturally sell at a higher price point. So today you might buy media with 1 or 2 data points. In the future, if you're paying a higher CPM, let's say 50% higher, you're going to have to buy less media and be much smarter about how you do that. And we think third-party data fits in there.
Yeah, and we'll come back to the data store in just a few questions. Chad, so you are a practitioner. We are vendors and partners. How do you think about building a data-powered culture? I mean, your organization is complex. You have offline activity. You have online activity. How have you tried to build a data-powered culture within the Virgin Hotels?
It's especially challenging for us at the resort I'm at now. In my previous employer, our biggest challenge was always the single version of the truth, or what we might call the golden record. We have data sources coming in from everywhere. You could rent a cabana, you could buy a show ticket, you could book a dining reservation, you could book your room, you could go down and drop a couple dollars in the slot machine and sign up for the Players Club program. We've always had this challenge with matching all of that data up to show a single individual so that we can understand what their buying behaviors are. And then we can market to them effectively. We want to get to that one-to-one marketing. That has been an amazing challenge. I will tell you the resort I'm with now, we are managed by Hilton. We're very happy to have that partnership with them. Our casino floor is the very first Native American operated casino in the state of Nevada. Mohegan Sun leases our casino floor. We are a Virgin brand, so that is a licensing agreement we have with Virgin, so that is the flag we fly. That is the brand standards we incorporate for our guests. That is the design element of the property. And we also have AEG managing our 5,000-seat theater, the largest entertainment company in the world. So we've got all of these loyalty programs. We allow you to combine all of those loyalty programs if you want to at the front desk when you check in or when you book your reservation. We will allow you to combine each and every one of those. Where I'm losing sight is there's not data sharing across those platforms. So the No program for Virgin is not sharing data with the Hilton Honors program, which is not sharing data with the Momentum program with Mohegan Sun. So a big challenge for us right now is figuring out at the property level, not the corporate level, how do we get to that one-to-one marketing? So we've incorporated a couple of tools in place where we do some marketing at the property level, where we're collecting all that data. We have some tools and resources available. David Rosales, sitting here in the audience today, manages that process on our behalf, and it's been a growth opportunity, but we're not there yet.
How do you think about the role of a CDP in unlocking this puzzle you just described? It sounds very complicated, by the way.
It's very complicated, and we have not found that solution yet, to be honest with you. It's something we continue to look into and invest in. We have a couple of tools right now that are very manual, and the data that is coming in for us to make those data-driven decisions, a lot of times are coming from IT, they're coming from revenue management, they're coming from the marketing team as well, and those are all types of decisions. Things like people that are scanning QR codes on property. You mentioned that we've got folks that are online and offline, and that's true. But I would say today there's much more online than we recognize.
Sure.
So you show up to the property, you've booked your room online, you've done your research online, you've done your destination research online. You show up, and it's not offline anymore. You're scanning QR codes for menus. You're interacting with a touchscreen map of the property. You're booking your dining reservations on OpenTable. You're doing your research on Yelp. All of those systems are systems we're paying attention to, but again, they're manual, and that information is coming from different individuals.
So the promise of the CDP is to unify those into one place.
That's right, and that's so important.
Yeah, that brings me to a question for you, David. So this is a tricky one. We're in the CDP space, you're in the data warehouse space, we're partners. Where do you think data unification should be happening? Should it be happening at the CDP level, or should it be happening at the data warehouse level? And what are the considerations brands should think about?
It's a good question. Are you buying my cocktails later? Because it'll
buying.
sway my answer. No, I think it's ultimately up to to the marketer. I don't think there's any one, decision whether it's CDP or should it happen in a place like Snowflake. It's ultimately up to the marketer. If you push me on one answer, I'd say it's potentially both, right? So it depends on what you want to do with the CDP. Are you trying to personalize experience? Are you trying to segment? We have many partners who have data like in a Zeta where they're using it for those applications, and yet they're still shipping data into Snowflake to do advanced analytics and then push it to Zeta to personalize experience or provide one of those applications. So the answer is probably both.
Yep.
I think one of the points of differentiation of Zeta, which is really unique, is you're not only a CDP, you're also a DSP.
Yeah.
And
an
that,
ESP.
yeah, and an ESP, sorry. And that puts you in a unique place because some of the other CDPs in the space maybe then have to tap into other partnerships to actually activate that data. So in that case, in the case of Zeta, we actually see a lot of partners that do a lot just within the platform themselves, but then oftentimes they bolster some of that analysis with Snowflake.
So more existentially, what have you seen when enterprises try to deconstruct their silos and move to Snowflake? What's the big blocker typically? Like what takes the most time? What's the most challenging thing to get around?
Yeah, I mean, like the big blocker is, okay, if you're gonna take data out of your CDP and you're gonna pull in data sets from other types of partners, whether it's a DSP that, let's say, is not, connected to a CDP as an all-in-one solution, how are you unifying those records? How are you doing it in a privacy compliant way? What kind of third-party data partnerships are you using? And then just vetting that whole partner ecosystem and understanding who you want to use to extrapolate the most value and then pipe that data into your CDP to sort of get the most out of your CDP. I mean, there's a lot of talk about composable CDPs today and using a handful of different partners on Snowflake versus a CDP itself. However, I think CDPs still have tremendous value. It's just a matter of what are you doing in Snowflake that adds value to that CDP? And I think, with Zeta, we've seen a lot of those great use cases where they've given some thought to, okay, I'm going to use my Zeta CDP for this, and then some of the additional work that's going to add value to that CDP I'm going to do in Snowflake with these partners. And it's really just vetting those partners. That's probably the biggest hurdle.
Chad, question for you. How are you currently personalizing? Are you using real-time personalization, or is it more batch personalization? How do you think about personalization for the customers at the hotel?
Well, the majority of what we do is batched personalization. There is some one-to-one personalization we're doing, and that is taking in customer preference engines and information that we're collecting from the customer. And as they arrive to the property and activate those items, such as, I prefer vodka over tequila, we will activate on that immediately. And if you show up to a Virgin Hotels and you've identified in the preference engine that you prefer vodka, we will have that waiting in your room. So we are executing at a small level.
Democratization, yeah.
That's a small example, and that's something that we're growing, we're learning, we're building. But for the most part, it's batched.
Yeah, so it comes down to the experience, and it sounds like you guys are moving into more of a real-time format as you continue.
That's correct. We want to get smarter about the offerings we have. So if you come in and you enjoy boxing, for instance, and you're a big fan of boxing, we want to make sure that when you are considering Las Vegas and your consideration set for Virgin Hotels Las Vegas, that we're promoting the items that we know you're interested in. So we're not going to push out a golf offer to somebody who's interested in boxing.
Yeah.
And entertainment's a big focus for us, so we tie those in every chance we get.
Yeah, makes sense. Travis, pivoting a little bit, clean rooms and safe havens. What's the role in the future of data democratization? How do they play in? How should brands think about those? Because in our experience, what we've heard about is it's a big consideration for 2023. Adoption right now has been lighter than we thought it would be, but we think it's really coming. I think the deprecation of the cookie being pushed out has slowed people down. How should we think about clean rooms moving forward?
Yeah, I think when we look at the data democratization, right, we also look at the massive privacy changes that happen, right? And all of the regulations, we have 4 new ones starting in January alone. One in California, one in Vermont, and I forget the other 2 states, but 2 more here in the U.S. And then you've got GDPR over in the EU. So as marketers want to use, you hear this desire, how can we use more of our data? How can we collaborate with it? But then you also have, the chief security officer coming in and saying, but you have to do by all these rules. And so that's where the clean room and safe havens come in. Like, how do you do this in a permissioned way? How do you keep your strategic interests safe? And how, most importantly, do you keep your consumers safe? How do you make sure there's not leaks of data or that one of your competitors doesn't get access to your data? So, where the role of the clean room is to allow that to happen, right? So you can collaborate with a data set. So let's take retailer and a CPG. Retailer wants to give the CPG the ability to see the data, but not take it out of the clean room. Like, they can run queries. Maybe there's some rules on it. They can never get down to one-to-one. They can run queries at the 25-person limit, at a 100-person limit. They can build reports, but those aren't one-to-one reports. They're at a higher aggregate level. So the CPG is getting more data than it would before, but the retailer is protecting its secret sauce, and it's making sure that when it goes and negotiates with that CPG 6 months from now on the trade agreement, that the CPG hasn't manipulated the data to take an advantage of it. So I think that's where clean rooms come into play. And then it pairs into everything that David talked about, is then how do you take a clean room and make it interoperable with everything else? Because the worst thing you can have is a clean room that becomes a bunker where the data gets stuck.
Yeah, we're finding that there's a new clean room provider we hear about like every week, and that could create a problem in and of itself. So I'm curious as to how the market will solve that problem moving forward. A question for both of you. As you think of data-powered cultures, because you're selling into organizations that are using different aspects of your platform, warehousing, data enrichment, identity, what are some of the best practices you've seen enterprises use to really infuse that into the culture?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, like, it's always daunting when we talk to people, because some of the things that we do, just like the idea of data sharing or what we call collaboration today, is so novel that it might take 1 or 2 meetings to actually sort of get them to understand the concept. And then we sort of talk about the various workloads. I said, that we launched as a data warehouse. We have since evolved into things like data apps, data lake, data science, data engineering.
You're moving beyond the CIO, right?
That's right. We're moving towards like the CMO and the CDO. It's turning into a marketing discussion versus a technical discussion. And while it initially arose out of a technical discussion, it very quickly migrated because they understood that, hey, listen, this platform is so intuitive, it's so easy to use, it provides so much value that they have to use it. And so we're seeing more knowledge of SQL and other programming languages and the ability to actually work within Snowflake to extrapolate value. And so when we talk to people, one of the really hurdles that we have to overcome is to like sort of temper their expectations because there's so much that we're able to do. We have to say like, hey, let's come up with a plan. It's almost like
phase 1,
yeah,
phase 2,
exactly.
phase 3.
It's like, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to work with a partner like a LiveRamp to resolve identity to a golden record within Snowflake and then activate out of Snowflake, or across Zeta or another partner? Do you want to use the Zeta CDP to help personalize experience and sort of drive personal interaction with your strongest constituents? Do you want to do other things? And so we really sort of have to say, hey, this is what's possible. This is what we think will add value in the near term, the midterm, and the long term, and really customize that plan for what the growth of their company is about with Snowflake. And we really view it as a partnership. And I think they respect that, and I think once they get in there and we solve one of those problems or several of those problems with our partner ecosystem, whether it's a LiveRamp or a Zeta, then they're like, okay, like what else can we do?
It's the unlock.
Yeah, that's right. And if you listen to Frank or Mike Scarpelli, our CFO, talk about earnings, they talk about retention of our partners and partner growth. Like that's really what's driving it, is like our ability to solve one solution and then riff on that and solve additional solutions.
Makes sense.
I actually love that. I got to tell you, I have great respect for that. One of the biggest challenges we have from a resource perspective is IT. And so when we have these tools and solutions that come in, we've heard this over and over today in these different sessions. As a marketer, we tend to bite off more than we can chew. We want to jump in and we want to save the world right away. And I have to tell you, it's refreshing to hear from your standpoint that step-by-step process, because we need IT resources, we need marketing resources to be able to go in and do this effectively, or we end up doing it halfway. Right. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Travis, what about you?
Yes, I would completely agree with David. Like, you have to start small. Like, we find the same thing. Like, the people who craft the giant whiteboard that looks incredible, it then has like a 5-year roadmap to it. haven't yet seen one of those work out. But the people who pick one use case and they're like, you know what, we're going to do this in 3 months,
Yep.
those work pretty well, and then they add on to that. The other thing I think that we see really successful is like that privacy, consumer-first nature. Like, how do you make sure that everything you're doing with the data feels safe from a consumer perspective? I think that's like a big thing that every marketer has got to be thinking
More and
about
more important.
in every conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of IT resources, data visualization. So we typically find that marketers really struggle, this is for you, Chad, with visualizing what's happening. The data exists at the row level or the record level. Then you want to see it, you want to do something with it, you want to understand what's happening, the trends. Do you use tools like that currently, and how are you thinking about it?
We do. We recently incorporated a new tool. So previously, when we were at the Hard Rock, we had 3 different systems we were really utilizing. We had the data warehouse, we had a separate email marketing platform, and we had a separate BI tool. We've recently made the migration over to a new system, Sendine and eInsights, and so we are in the middle of training right now on the eInsights side of things that allow us to go in at different levels of the organization, whether it be myself or a marketing team member or a revenue management team member, to be able to go into that eInsights tool and start seeing what's happening with that data in real time so that they can then make business decisions off of that. Again, we're right in the middle of training for that, so I don't have a lot to share with the group, but we're building that out right now, and it's something that we were missing before.
And you saw the Agile Intelligence presentation earlier, so we're definitely thinking about this as well.
Absolutely.
For the enterprise, very much so. We have a couple minutes left, so one piece of advice to the CMO and how they can prepare for data democratization from each of you, and maybe a bold prediction for 2032, 10 years from now.
Wow, one piece of advice to the CMO, I would say.
I'm listening.
Buy Snowflake, is that the advice?
No, not necessarily, but vet your partners carefully and put them through their paces, particularly data providers. As you know, Travis was talking about the value of data, the granularity of data, and make sure that the privacy policy, the impact assessment is above board. I totally agree that data is valuable, only is valuable in that it warrants, in that it protects the privacy of individual consumers. That's something that we take very seriously. I know LiveRamp takes that very seriously in Zeta as well. Predictions, I think that you will see mass consolidation in terms of the programmatic side of the house. DSPs maybe some getting acquired and merging into a few predominant players. I think Zeta's one of them because they play in multiple spaces. And I would say probably on the supply side of the house too. And Travis made a great point, is that we'll have less addressable inventory, and some of the power players will weed out some of the mid and long tail on both the demand side and the supply side.
Makes sense. Travis?
So I think my one recommendation would be start testing now. Like, as we look at this, like, it's great to have these panels, these conversations, but the really great thing is do a POC, work with any of your vendors. We love testing concepts. And I think I speak for all of AdTech in saying that everyone in AdTech loves testing concepts. So come and let's do that. Prediction for 2032, I think the world's going to look a lot like Europe. Not with the whole month of August off, maybe, but probably not, but with GDPR. So I think we're going to move into a really opt-in regime, and that every brand should be thinking about that, because I think that's a very large fundamental shift from where we are today.
Chad?
I think a piece of advice for any CMO would be to start small. Understand what you're trying to accomplish, start small, measure behind that, prove it out, and build from there. Again, too many times we jump in and we want to do too much too fast, and we end up doing things not as good as we could. And so that's my recommendation. I think for 2032, we have a lot of laws that are starting to come out around privacy. And it seems like when we start seeing those types of regulations come out, there seems to be less privacy. And what I mean by that is, I think everybody would agree. We know that apps listen. We know that Amazon-type devices, and I'm not calling Amazon out, but those types of devices listen, and they utilize that data. They may not be sharing it with others, but they're utilizing it. So I think in 2032, we're going to be in a place where we are at one-to-one marketing. I think it will be done responsibly at that time. I think it will provide a benefit to the consumer, and it'll be very specific and targeted to the individual based on all these other ways that data is being collected.
Makes a ton of sense, and I'll leave you with one. My prediction is that the CDP is going to do a lot more than anything people think it does today. So I really think CDP is going to become the new ERP, candidly. And it's already happening. We're in the early days of it. And my one advice to CMOs is definitely take a close look at Zeta if you don't work with us. We have many of these solutions that you're looking for all under one umbrella. And it was a pleasure having you all on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.